Hello, in this video, it's a video I posted earlier without narration, but I want to focus on the early history of Australia and especially the Oddfellows and the Freemasons. But before white settlement, Australia had long been occupied, and the original people also built stone circles which had astronomical alignments. This is just coming to light now, but in 1770, Captain Cook arrived, the first Englishman to arrive on the east coast of Australia, and Joseph Banks was his resident scientist on the boat, and also said to be the first Freemason on Australian soil. In 1788, the first fleet arrived with the supply ship, ship Supply, and HMAS Sirius leading the fleet. And so began the European colonisation of Australia. Interesting is that a very small French fleet arrived at the same time, led by La Perouse. There's a suburb in Sydney called La Perouse which commemorates this, and it was the French probably weren't in enough force to have resisted it, but it could have gone either way, and Australia might have even become a French colony. But January 26, 1788, the Union Jack is raised, and the colony of New South Wales, as it was called then, is officially begun. In November of that year, the second township of Australia was set up in Parramatta to the west. Governor Arthur Phillip, his surveyor was Augustus Oult, and the first main street in Sydney, now called Lang Street, was 200 feet wide. A little bit curious here is 200 feet. I'm a little bit suspicious that it actually might be 205, because the first high street, now George Street in Parramatta, was 205 feet, as were the streets of Versailles and also the main streets in early Washington. 205 feet is a lovely number. In future episodes, when I get to the beyond Pythagorean harmonies, there's a series of layers. The Pythagorean numbers 108, 144, 432, etc. are the first layer of the onion, the outside layer. But in 1799, Unlawful Societies Act was designed to restrict activities of groups such as Freemasons, Oddfellows, other secret societies, because the English Empire had suffered a huge loss in the loss of the American colonies, and the independence leaders were, with the exception of one or maybe two, were all Freemasons. And so this was the English were keen not to allow these smaller secret societies, fraternal groups, to organise. 1800, James Meehan arrives. He was to become the chief surveyor under Governor Lachlan Macquarie. The Lands Department building in Sydney, amongst many other statues, commemorates James Meehan. He basically surveyed everything in the New South Wales colony. Huge impact. He also surveyed or redesigned Parramatta when Lachlan Macquarie arrived, but 8 years before his arrival, the Freemasons' Arms in Parramatta was established by James Lara. That same year, a French scientific expedition arrived, and they spent time staying at the Freemasons' Arms, and so we have some good documentation regarding when was the date. The Lachlan Macquarie chambers are next to the Freemasons' Arms Lane, and he was to arrive in 1810, but Governor Lachlan Macquarie was described as a conscientious Freemason. So he wasn't just a member, he was very interested in survey. Very much like George Washington, he designed and measured and laid out the cities and redesigned existing towns, as well as founding many new towns. Described as the father of Australia because he arrived to find a penal colony, and instead he created a country. He was sent to replace Governor William Bligh, the famous from the Bounty, and he was also the fifth and final of what they call the autocratic governors of Australia. Very important because, as I said, he was sent to govern a prison colony, and he broke the rules and the orders he was given, and he founded a nation. He began building proper towns, redesigning old towns, building churches, destroying the English class system, allowing, giving early freedom to convicts, as well as allowing them to rise in society. Yes, he was so very much like George Washington. He was into survey, he was into design, and setting up a country, very into measurement especially. Governor Macquarie began by redesigning Sydney and Parramatta, giving orders to his surveyor James Meehan to redesign the street plan, and also to the street width, which will become very important later. Because it was pre-existing, he was limited to the amount he could do, but he did set up a series of new towns, such as Liverpool and the 5 towns in the northwest, known as the Macquarie Townships. But the map of Parramatta was already existing. We can see from the map of James Meehan how the streets were narrowed to 66 feet, and even the block sizes were set to these very important numbers, which I've sort of touched on in earlier episodes regarding harmonics. But Liverpool in Sydney, southwest Sydney, Macquarie Street, we're going to find Macquarie and Elizabeth Street, his wife Elizabeth, and also Macquarie Street and Elizabeth Street in Parramatta. But the 66 feet wide streets have very important connections to metrology, especially sun, earth and moon, and to fire. And in December 1910, he gave James Meehan orders on the 5 new towns, Richmond, Windsor, Wilberforce, and one or two other that escaped my mind, Castlereagh and Pitt Town. In his letter, we get the excellent confirmation of what he was up to, and how he was using these sacred measures, sacred numbers, which are so strongly connected to sun, earth and moon. For instance, 108. Pythagorean numbers are nice, but they're actually the surface layer. Underneath, there are a series of other connections built on this 33, 66, 99 scale, which is sort of, yeah. But for instance, Richmond. Now, another important part about the town layout is that these are built, the blocks are designed around the Vesica Pisces and Pythagorean theorem. 3, 4, 5 triangles essentially make up these blocks, with the exception of Windsor, which is built around the 5, 12, 13 Pythagorean triplet. I've made a little bit of a boo-boo there, but the centre of Wilberforce is 33 1/3 degrees south. So with the redesign of Sydney, the redesign of Parramatta, as well as the new towns such as Liverpool, Castlereagh, Richmond, Wilberforce and Pitt Town, these numbers 66 feet, 528 and 792 are key. Again, these are underneath the Pythagorean numbers. These are hugely important. And in 1811, Hobart, Tasmania, James Meehan accompanied the Macquaries, and they redesigned Hobart, 66 feet again, but even the blocks and the city blocks, but also the individual blocks of land have these rather lovely numbers running through them. They connect back to earlier episodes. I've been talking about harmonics of sun, earth and moon. The Pythagorean numbers are at the top, but underneath we have what I just refer to as the Masonic numbers, 33, 66 and 99, which are the beyond the Pythagorean, and when we start to go into deeper levels of knowledge. 1815, he also, with James Meehan, set up, founded the town of Bathurst, the first inland township of Australia. Bathurst will later be redesigned in 1835 by Mitchell, but they still kept the same plan going on. And as I'm towards the end of the video, I'm going to discuss the individual towns and how those numbers are reinforced over and over again. Harmonic numbers, but also these, let's call them esoteric occult numbers, which lie underneath and give another level of knowledge. In 1816, Elizabeth Macquarie designed Mrs. Macquarie's chair and Mrs. Macquarie's road. Important to note that she was the one who brought the architectural books with her. She was she was not like some submissive woman. She was very intelligent, and you notice that it's 3 miles and 377 yards, which can be translated into 5,280 yards. 377 is another very important number. Apart from being a Fibonacci number, the Chartres Cathedral is 377 feet high. The Gates of Europe in Madrid, 377 feet high, and the Vortrekker monument has 377 steps leading up to the monument. These are, again, one of these numbers underneath the Pythagoreans, which is the surface layer. There's a whole bunch of much deeper and much more interesting information. Australia got its name because of Governor Macquarie, and the first person to call it Australia was Matthew Flinders in his map. Matthew Flinders is the grandfather of Matthew Flinders Petrie, the hugely important archaeologist who had so much to do with first proper surveys and geometrical analysis of Stonehenge as well as the Great Pyramid. Matthew Flinders Petrie has in Jerusalem, he has a very important museum there named after him, funded by the Rockefellers. For instance, and again I've mentioned Elizabeth Macquarie being a driving force, not just a simple housewife. She was very intelligent, she was very forward thinking. In 1818, Governor Macquarie orders the Great South Road, now known as the Hume Highway, after Hamilton Hume, but Hamilton Hume and James Meehan were the main surveyors there. Also in 1818, in Macquarie, now called Macquarie Place, there is an obelisk there. All the measurements in the colony were defined from this point, so this is a 0 mile marker for the entire colony. Just in the previous episode I mentioned how many 0 mile markers have been moved, but that's something else. But the architect and Freemason Francis Greenway also designed the obelisk and Macquarie Place there in the city. The fountain no longer exists, but again, Francis Greenway, the Freemason, he was also a convict. Now, because of Governor Macquarie's reforms, a former convict such as the surveyor Meehan and the architect Francis Greenway were allowed to rise above and get government work and become serious members of the community. Again, breaking the English class system, and has created many enemies for him locally, but also overseas, because Governor Macquarie was breaking the rules. He was sent here to govern a prison colony, but he was spending quite a lot of money building churches, building roads, building new towns, and essentially establishing a nation, which eventually would lead to his resignation. But Macquarie Place is sort of loaded with the same sort of symbols and some important key architectural points which you'll find reflected elsewhere across the colony. 1818, he commissioned the construction of St. Luke's Church. Francis Greenway was the architect. Key point to notice is the archways on St. Luke's have 33 stones over the archways. 1819, St. James Church in the city, again commissioned by Macquarie, and the architect was Francis Greenway. Still to this day, it's quite an important church, especially in regards to Freemasons, esoteric groups and so forth. Important to note is also the first rector of St. Luke's in Liverpool was Reverend Cartwright, and he would replace the rector of St. James Church in Sydney town itself. Now, I couldn't find no mention of James Meehan being a Freemason, but Francis Greenway and Governor Macquarie certainly were. Also, Reverend Robert Cartwright. I haven't been able to 100% solid link him to any secret society, but he was very important. The first rector at St Luke's in Liverpool, and he replaced the rector at St James in the city later on. So we see that between these three, and including James Meehan, basically they set up so much of the nation of Australia in the New South Wales colony. Very important. The current site of St Andrew's Cathedral, Governor Macquarie began building a church there, but because of certain issues and criticisms it was abandoned but re-begun later. A later governor actually retrieved the original foundation stone set by Governor Macquarie and put that back in position. And if you do visit the church, there's some a glass floor there which has some of the original foundations there. So we have the surveyor James Meehan and the architect Greenway. Governor Macquarie was causing quite a bit of ripples amongst the local landholding elite, and they reported and criticised to England, resulting in Judge Thomas Bigg arriving. When John Thomas Bigg arrived, he began to investigate. Was shocked to find how Macquarie's liberal attitude towards convicts, as well as his public spending, and he caused many problems for Macquarie and reported back to England, which was eventually to result in Governor Macquarie resigning. Interesting point, in 1820 the first warranted Masonic meeting in Australia was interrupted and they were arrested. The 1799 Unlawful Societies Act forced Macquarie, even though he was a Mason, he had to order that that secret societies were clamped down on. And I think there's some things to be investigated there. But the Bong Bong site was chosen in 1820. I mentioned earlier Hume and Meehan surveying the road through the southern highlands towards the Goulburn Plain, which would later become the township of Goulburn, which I've mentioned a little bit earlier. Very strong Freemason Oddfellow connections in the origin of the town, but also in its later development. Also the Marulan Ramp, I've touched on it earlier, but St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney, the Catholic Cathedral, Governor Macquarie allotted the land for this church. The original church was destroyed, but St Mary's now is quite a lovely church. And so in November the 1st, 1821, Governor Macquarie resigns because of continual criticism and interference caused by Thomas Bigg, who was very upset that Macquarie was breaking the class system and building a nation rather than governing a penal colony. And so we can give a hiss to Bigg and a hip hip hooray to Governor Macquarie. He went back to England to answer the criticisms that were made about him and died shortly after. And in his mausoleum in Scotland, we can see the symbol with the hand and the dagger. Mrs. Macquarie's folly, it's a new sculpture in the Royal Botanical Gardens, which were founded by, we see the same symbol there on the top with the hand and the dagger, a family emblem, family crest. And so in 1835, Elizabeth Macquarie dies. But we can still see the legacy of Elizabeth Macquarie in Elizabeth Bay, Elizabeth Street, Mrs. Macquarie's chair, Mrs. Macquarie's road, and the wishing tree. And also how Macquarie Street, the churches and the roads and the town plans that Macquarie built, especially going to see in cities such as towns as Parramatta, Sydney, and I mentioned earlier the Macquarie Townships to the northwest. Elizabeth Street, Macquarie Road runs throughout them, so they're very important and left their mark, more than just socially, but literally on the map and on the street plans and in the design of the city. James Meehan, I showed this earlier. This was a redesign of Parramatta and the map drawn by Meehan. 66 feet wide streets, or 792 inches. But also from Augusta Salt, we can see how 528 feet from the wharf to the governor's mansion. These key numbers, 33, 528, 792. So in the harmonic series that I've been posting, I've been beginning with Pythagorean numbers, which are very nice, but they're only the surface layer. And to really understand the plan and what's going on, we need to move beyond them and look deeper. Because from there we'll find pi and phi and many other references to deeper esoteric knowledge, and move into some very other interesting mathematical and astronomical areas. So, hidden in Valletta for the ideal town, we went through, but let's go through again. 66 feet, 8 chains. Now, one chain, or Gunther's chain, is 66 feet, so you just can multiply those numbers. But what is underneath all of them is these same two numbers, 528, 792. 528 I'll get into later, because it's essentially defines the temple of man, and it has connections to New Jerusalem as described in the Bible and some very other interesting points. And pi over 2 defines the dimensions of the streets in regards to carriageway versus the footpath. And also, if you were to use the carriageway in regards to the width of the street, we get phi proportions as in the Great Pyramid. But the Richmond map, so we'll go through the maps and we'll see how each one of them, these block plans, have the same reappearing numbers over and over again. 792, 528. The importance of survey and measurement is something which we can go back to Washington, in George Washington, and his surveyor Andrew Ellicott, and the same sort of system. So it can be easily overlooked and thought of as non-significant. It's just by just using some standard measurement and just drawing by a grid. That's not how it works. These people are very clever, and it's about multiple levels. Esoteric means initiated, and so you see the first layer. That's like an onion. That's only the first one, and there are deeper and deeper layers. So we start with the Pythagorean numbers on the top, built basically around 3, 9 and 27, but deeper knowledge starts to appear as we look into 33 and 66 feet, and how the blocks and the streets especially have this number 792 or 7,920. The equatorial diameter of the Earth above 99.94% is 7,920 miles. But to understand the deeper significance, you need to understand the Masonic tracing boards and ionic and the Doric scale of measurements, because from there, Earth, Sun and Moon, as well as New Jerusalem measures will emerge from there. And through the New Jerusalem measurements, we can also get the 5,280, as in 5,280 feet per mile. But again, it's much more than that. It's levels and levels of knowledge built around harmonies of Sun, Earth and Moon, as well as I just call it the temple of man, or the structures. So, under the sun and the moon we have the earth, but in between them we have man. The James Meehan map, early map of Bathurst, and now we have the 1835 map of Bathurst by Mitchell. I'm going to play a clip from Halfasheep. Did a wonderful video interviewing an architect, Henry Bialowas, who works in Bathurst, and he'll discuss that a little bit more. But again, these blocks and the same system of measurement. So the town might be orientated. Some blocks will be in squares, some blocks will be in rectangles, but they're always got the same knowledge underneath it. And interesting comparison, New Haven, Connecticut, this 9 square design, and notice that the New Haven, Connecticut map, the town square in the centre is unbordered. The map of Bathurst in the centre is has no border around it, and in a short while I'll play a clip where Halfasheep interviews Henry Bialowas, and he'll discuss some very interesting points regarding to this. But also, if we look at the measures, so 792, 144 of a Pythagorean number, but more essentially these esoteric numbers built around 33, 66 and 99, which of course give us 792 and 5. It's 5,280 palm. I've made a bit of a boo-boo there. I won't change it because I've covered it earlier enough. So Bathurst, and now let's hear from Mr. Henry Bialowas, interviewed by Halfasheep.
The old TAFE College buildings and the Carillon, which you would have noticed in the town square.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that made me realise that Bathurst had a town square in 1833, then subsequently somehow lost it. And that to me was peculiar in itself. And I thought, well, how does a town actually lose a town square? And what does the town square mean, and where actually is it? So I came across this map, which is Mitchell's sign map of 1833. And there are some things here that I'd like to point out. He writes the word square here, and then he numbers the squares around it, and if you continue that numbering, 9, 10, 11, 12. So what we're dealing with here is a kind of an enigma in a way, because I suddenly thought, well, what is he telling us here?
He's telling us something. The
surveyor.
obvious thing would be go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Exactly right. So surveyors, by definition, are about giving information to people. And yet this guy was doing that, but in a kind of mysterious, enigmatic way. And I thought, well, what is the meaning of these numbers that seem to spiral out from this point? And then when I looked at the square, I suddenly realised this square doesn't have a boundary. All the other squares do. This square does not have a number. All the others do. This square does not have a name. And in the middle of it, he puts the word church. So the question that I think Mitchell was asking us, what is it that can't be bound, can't be named, can't be numbered, and begins in a geometric spiral?
Begins and ends.
Exactly right. So that's the omega point. So what he's talking about here is, what he's created here is not just a blueprint for a town, but a blueprint for a way of life. Because what he's done is put the church in the exact omega point.
In zero.
And so that's the meaning of that spiral, and that to me is the answer to the riddle. What is it that can't be named, bounded, numbered, and begins and ends in infinity? So that to me, I thought, well, who is this guy Mitchell? And then
Earlier I pointed out that the James Meehan, there's a statue of James Meehan on the Lands Department building, and we can also see here a statue of Mitchell. That whole building has many, all the important engineers, architects, surveyors, botanists and explorers. But Perth, Australia. But first, before we look at Perth, we need to... James Galooly has done some awesome research regarding Scotland and the new town of Edinburgh, designed to 5 proportions, and he also pointed out that the builders were masons to a man. Again, these organisations were all about knowledge, and as Henry Bialowas said, it's about passing on information. It's about also harmonies. It's about building a way of life which is harmonious with the earth, with the stars, and with the sun and the moon. Very clever people, and they... it's about layers of knowledge, and so you need to investigate and look deeper and deeper, and you'll find more and more layers. Some other researchers have mentioned how the new town plan connects with the design of Perth in Australia. Pardon? And as we look at Perth, we're going to find again 792 and 528, as well as the main street being 99 feet wide, which is 33 yards. Again, another reference to this system of knowledge. It's a wonderful system, and it's got to do with harmonies. It's got to do about building a community, building a system which works and which is, well, harmonious. And Williamsburg, the original colonial city of the United States, the same thing. It's 5,280 feet long and 99 feet wide streets. Even the orientation of it, you might point out that it's not perfectly east or west, and they're varied and more, well, almost exclusively, they're never north or south either. There's always a slight offset, and that's very important because it's about astronomical alignments as well, especially to key astronomical events. Pardon? Adelaide, capital of Australia. Capital of South Australia, by Colonel William Light. Once again, he was to use. Now, it's often said that he departed from these earlier systems of designing, and that is somehow different. Well, to the eye, it would look like that beginning from the start. But once again, if you examine it a little bit further, you're going to see the same system arriving again. The dimensions of the streets, the dimensions of the blocks, and even the layouts of the street, always coming back to 66 feet, 132, which is 528 palm. I've dealt with how many cathedrals and important memorials in Washington and across the world have these numbers. Same with 99 feet or 33 yard wide streets. It's a constant, and it's far beyond Australia. But even these public squares, how he's arranged them, so there's 32 of the 700 allotments, 32 with the central point being the 33rd point again. It's clearly, so a lot of the literature by the academics is actually very wrong, quite wrong, and you can just by doing comparisons. Robert Hoddle, he surveyed the city of Melbourne, and again he's using these same systems and the same numbers. He arrived in New South Wales and was worked under Macquarie and under Meehan, and then moved down to the southern state of Victoria. And again, it might be a departure to the eye from the plans of Sydney and Macquarie's plans, but it's the same thing: 33 feet, 99 feet or 33 yards, 528 feet, 792. Harmony points about designing a town. That's about a way of life. When a surveyor lays down a town, he forever sets the paths you walk, where you work, where you live, are all set by the surveyor, and they're locked in there. They have to be done correctly, or you're going to have not just an ugly town, but if there's no knowledge, there's nothing underneath it. It's not going to inspire people. Just like a cathedral will use symbols and harmonics, the audio properties in the cathedral will add to the beauty of the building and will inspire and create better music and better thought and a more philosophical understanding. And Brisbane town, now Brisbane city, again the same pattern, the same numbers. He was building with squares rather than rectangles, but it's always repeated. You just got to have a look a little bit deeper, and you'll find it again and again. And so, but what's the importance of 792? Ionic fathom. Ionic is an ancient system of measurement. Ionic columns are key points on Freemason trading boards, Freemason temples, and all in the architecture. So the sun can be defined by 792. In miles, the common mile, the equatorial diameter of the Earth above 99.9% is 7,920 miles, which it doesn't take decoding, unlike the sun. But as we move to the moon, we have the same 792, and to understand it, you have to understand the tracing boards and the ancient measurement systems of the architects involved in this. The moon is 792 Ionic cubits, defines the equatorial radius of the moon, equatorial diameter of the moon, again above 99.94%. Where else do we see it? Well, in New Jerusalem, as described in the Bible. The 12,000 furlong is 792,000 feet. Again, conversion points, a harmony between various measure systems, a harmony between sun, earth and moon, and man's place amongst them. So just a quick look again: sun, earth and moon, and the temple of man, which most commonly I talk about New Jerusalem in the Bible, but it's also in other places, but just because of because it's so common and so easy to find, you can look it up. But back to Brisbane now. Alan Cunningham was a botanist, very important. He then called the Royal Botanical Gardens, as they are called now in Sydney. He was a key figure in the establishment of that. He brought botanical books and samples to help plant the first gardens. And in the lands department, he's one of the featured the statues, one of the very important people in there earlier on. In the Royal Botanical Gardens, there's an obelisk there, and the bones of Alan Cunningham were moved from the Devonshire Street Cemetery when it was demolished to make way for Central Station, and he is now interred in this obelisk in the Royal Botanical Gardens. He was also an explorer and in Brisbane, where we've just mentioned, he was an important explorer and surveyor to an extent, and so we see again across these cities and across all of Australia the importance of Meehan, Cunningham, Governor Macquarie, and the architect Francis Greenway. Freemasons Arms Lane in Parramatta. Again, it's just so many connections. And now here we are at Central Station. So this was the site of Central Station. Now was formerly the Devonshire Street Cemetery. And you hear the church bells, and these are St. Stephen's Church, designed by Edmund Blackett, which in some recent episodes I talked about the importance of him in regards to the churches all across New South Wales. But one of the other exits from Central Station, ionic columns, ionic measurements, we see ionic columns, and there's a plaque there which talks about the Devonshire Street Cemetery. James Lara, who was the founder who was the publican for the Freemasons Arms in Parramatta, he was also buried at Devonshire Street Cemetery, but when it was removed, his body, the local Jewish community paid for his body to be removed, as where other bodies were sort of just dumped away with. But right next to that particular exit from Central Station, the Ibero-American Plaza. With the exception of one person, all of these are famous South American independence leaders, actually with the exception of two, and virtually with the exception of one or two, they are all Freemasons. And except for important point as well is, so we have Henry the Navigator. I'll get to there at the end, but so with the exception of a Filipino independence leader, all the rest are South American independence leaders, Freemasons. And a key point to do with the Filipino independence leader, which his name eludes me at the moment, but he too was a Freemason, and the town plan of Manila was designed by Daniel Burnham, a key figure in the City Beautiful movement, which I've talked about a lot in his influence in Washington, Chicago, and so many cities across America. Simon Bolivar was another South American independence leader. It's not his picture there though, but again, this independence leaders and Freemasons, and we're seeing the connection and the influence in my city of Sydney of how important they were in the establishment of the city and the establishment of Australia as a nation, moving away from the old establishment towards a new. And as we come to the and also mentioned in some previous videos, a monument to the discoveries in Portugal, which has Henry the Navigator holding a key position. He's flanked by 32 other important discoverers. Again, 32 over 33, very esoteric, very system of occult knowledge. All this stuff is lovely. It's hidden in plain sight. So here we see a picture of the Filipino independence leader, known Freemason, and how architects such as Daniel Burnham and the City Beautiful movement also impacted and designed Manila itself. So I hope you've enjoyed and had learned something from this. I've had a great time sort of studying it and researching it, and learned so much about my own country and about its own history, which is just simply not taught. And so I'll give a big nod out to at least to the older Freemasons and what they've done to establish this country. Now, I've got to say, I'm not a Freemason, I'm not a Rosicrucian, I'm not a member of the Oddfellows, I'm not a member of the Druids, I'm not a shill. All right, this is traceable history which you can look up and research for yourself, as opposed to the unresearched paranoid reactionaries which will call this demonic and all this sort of other stuff. But it's not. It's lovely, it's beautiful, and it's got to do about, well, the nation that I live in and the freedoms and the non-class system that we have is completely 100% created by these groups. And so hope you enjoyed and have a good one.